Hi, welcome to the August 2023 webinar on stress. My name is Rachel. I'm the Corporate Wellness Manager for Empower, and I run Empower Wellbeing. And I'm super excited today to bring you more information on stress. I know it can be a very relevant topic for a lot of us, so really excited to dive into this, especially as we head into our August quarterly challenge on stress less. So, we're going to talk today about the impact of stress and mindset shifts and practical tips to combat stress. But before we take a deep dive, we should define stress. We know what it feels like to be stressed out, but what is stress? So, stress is defined as a physical response to adverse external influences. Or, more specifically, stress is a feeling of emotional or physical tension. It can come from any event or thought that makes you feel frustrated, angry, or nervous. Stress is your body's reaction to a challenge or a demand. The second definition tells us that stress is a negative feeling arising from circumstances or, importantly, anything that makes us feel frustrated, angry, or nervous. So lean into that part of that definition, that event or thought that can make you feel some kind of way, because we're going to dive really deep into that today. Before we dive into that thought aspect of it, I want to talk about what stress is on a physiologic level. So, what is the stress response? Well, on a biology basis, stress is the inaction of the sympathetic nervous system. What is that? Well, there are two systems or states our nervous system can be in: parasympathetic or sympathetic. Both systems are vital to our health and survival, and there should be a balance between the two. So, parasympathetic is what we call rest and digest. It is a relaxed state. Alarms in the body are not going off. During this state, the body experiences an increase in digestive enzymes, so that's the digest part of it, a decreased heart rate, and relaxed muscles, so it's resting. In contrast, when triggered, our body flips into the sympathetic state, also known as fight or flight, where systems are put on alert. During this state, we have a release of epinephrine, which is also known as adrenaline, which results in a faster heartbeat and pulse rate, increased blood flow to the muscles, which prepares you to run or to fight. Your blood pressure increases, you get rapid breathing. Oxygen increases to the brain, which increases your alertness, which is a good thing if you're faced with danger. Glucose or sugar is released from storage sites in the body, which supplies energy to the body, again, to fight or to run from this danger. And the inaction of this sympathetic fight or flight system is actually fairly simple. So, the first step is that the brain perceives a stressor. So, the hypothalamus is an area in the brain, and it is what interprets experiences as threatening or non threatening and then determines the appropriate reaction. So, in this case of activating the sympathetic nervous system, the brain says, hey, this threat is imminent. And as a result, a hormone is released. That hormone is called CRH, or corticotropin releasing factor, or sorry, CRF. And so CRF goes to bind on the pituitary gland, which triggers release of a hormone called ACTH, which is adrenocorticotropic hormone. The name is not important, but this ACTH binds to the adrenal glands, which release cortisol, cortisol is known as our stress hormone commonly. So cortisol is a hormone that leads to the physiologic reactions that I mentioned. So increased heart rate, breathing, the release of glucose, the sugar. Um, so this is the cascade that happens, and the details are not important. There's no quiz on hormone names, but the message here is that there is a physiologic response of hormone release in our bodies that is initiated by our brain, step one, perceiving something as a danger. And so this system would sound like a really bad thing, right? Like, I don't want to be triggering this system and getting stressed out. But my question to you is, stress always a bad thing? And the answer is no. So the stress response is a physiological phenomenon that is fundamental to survival. We must be able to see a stressor, perceive it as a stressor, and respond appropriately. But in our common day life, there are two categories of stress. So we can put all that stress into one of two categories: acute or chronic. So, acute is generally seen as a healthy adaptive response, whereas chronic stress is maladaptive. So, acute stress would be a short term stress, as in, for example, you're walking down a dark alley and you see someone with a knife. You're stressed out. And so your body has all of these reactions so that you can run away and get to safety. That is a very important physiological survival response. In contrast, chronic stress is long term. And so this would be things like a hostile work environment where you are communicated to in a rude way that really stresses you out, work pressure for too many deadlines where um, that stress response is chronically elevated, traffic, for example. There's no need to fight or flight traffic, but that would cause an elevated stress response. Family difficulties, toxic relationships, all of these things that can keep that fight or flight stress response elevated for an extended period of time. And so, this chronic stress is really what we're going to focus on today. So, we're going to be talking about this chronic stress that we face in our daily lives. Chronic stress does have a negative impact on our lives, and it can lead to a whole slew of reasons that we don't feel our best. And these can include depression, being more prone to depression or worsened depression, low energy states, trouble sleeping, change in appetite, whether that's an increase or a decrease. People respond differently in the case of stress, general unhappiness or dissatisfaction with life, feeling anxious, feeling agitated or irritable, feeling moody a lot, rapid mood fluctuations, and feeling angry or lonely. In addition to negative mood and behavioral aspects, chronic stress has negative physiological effects on our bodies. So, high blood pressure is kind of the obvious one here. Usually, if you are diagnosed with high blood pressure, they tell you to manage your stress because that's a very known correlation there that excessive stress can raise the blood pressure. But other effects of stress, addiction can be triggered by stress, as a person under chronic stress may search for coping mechanisms and may find maladaptive ones. Other effects, so a weakened immune system, suppression of thyroid hormones, an increased risk of heart disease and stroke, and weight gain and metabolic changes. So, regarding the metabolic changes, specifically cortisol, which we said is the stress hormone, it favors central fat deposition, which is basically the fat stored on the body is going preferentially to the area around our organs, which is known as visceral fat, which has more negative consequences than other areas of our body, which is subcutaneous fat. Also, that cortisol can lead to a decrease in leptin. Leptin is the hormone that makes us feel satisfied after eating, and an increase in ghrelin. Ghrelin is our hunger hormone, and so stress can lead you to feeling more hungry and increased appetite, which can have metabolic consequences on its own. So we can probably all agree that we want to avoid this chronic stress. But as we start learning to how to do so, let's talk about why we get stressed in the first place. So I want to go back to the original definition of stress as a physical response to adverse external influences. So I pose this definition because this is a very commonly accepted definition, but it's not bulletproof. To explain why, I'll give you an example. So, a long time ago, our biggest stress was predators. So, for an example, let's say a saber-toothed tiger. So, you see the tiger, you feel stress, physiologic responses occur, which cause us to fight or flee. But, and this would be the definition. You are having a physical response to an adverse external influence. But consider, what if there is a tiger there, but you don't see it? It may kill you, but there's no stress. So you are now not having that physical response to an adverse external influence that is there. Or what if you see something in the distance and you think it's a tiger? Will you have a stress response? Yes. But there is no tiger. So now you're having a physical response with no adverse external influences. So what's missing from this definition here is perception. So I use this example to say that stress is not always about an actual threat. Sometimes it is, but not always. But rather, it's about a perceived threat, which makes more sense. We perceive something to be a threat, whether it is or it isn't. And this makes more sense when we consider chronic stress. To expand this further in a way that explains chronic stress, negative emotions are stressful because they are perceived adverse influences. So when we think about chronic stress, we need to think about what we feel like is stressful and negative emotions that we experience. And I know it can sound insulting in a way to say that stress is about perception and mindset and thoughts because it places a personal responsibility on the individual. But this is not to say that your stress that you feel is not real because it is having those physiological reactions. Perceiving something as stressful is causing cortisol release, it is changing the body and the hormones. But this is important because it also provides a sense of control. If we know that we feel stressed every time we experience something that is negative, we are completely victims to our external influences. And this definition here tells us that that's not actually the case. And so we know that now that we have some level of control over our stress. And this is not uncommon to think, hey, we can control our stress, but a lot of people view stress, the ways that we can reduce it is by getting rid of the stressors. But then if we can't control all the stressors, then we're just kind of screwed. Other people may think, hey, we can control how we react. But that doesn't really change how we feel, and it doesn't change the source of the stress. So it's operating a little bit more downstream. It's saying, hey, I perceive this as a stressor. I couldn't change a stressor. I perceived it. How can I react? But my question is, how can I change how I perceive stressors? So this perception basis adds another layer to how we can control stress because it's controlling how we perceive and think about that stressor in the first place, which does have an effect on stress how stressed we feel. So how might we go about this perception piece? How would we go about changing how we perceive stress in order to feel less stress? And this goes into our mindset on stress. So there are three things I want to talk about when it comes to stress and mindset. These are the myth that we should choose stress, radical acceptance, and mindful awareness. So before we talk about shifting mindset about stress, we have to agree that this is a good thing to do, that this is what we want to do. So I want to address this common myth that stress is a motivator, that stress helps people succeed. However, the truth is that people who succeed in stress do so in spite of stress. We need engagement, absolutely. We need to set goals. We need to feel motivated sometimes, but we do not need stress to succeed. And a lot of our stress really comes from stressful or negative thoughts like, I'm not good enough, or I've never been successful in the past, so I probably won't be this time. Those thoughts hold you back rather than push you forward. And radical acceptance is something that we can do to help shift these thoughts. So, specifically, I touched on this in a second ago, but a ton of stress comes from our negative thoughts. And so, this is thinking that things should be different than the way they are. So, basically, not accepting the way things are is stressful. And radical acceptance helps to develop more of a like it is what it is mindset in a non gimmicky way. So, again, stress doesn't come from what's going on in your life exclusively. It comes from the way we think about what's going on in our lives. It's perception. So, radical acceptance is a big topic, but to distill it down, it is accepting that what is exactly how it should be. So, the goal of radical acceptance is to understand or make sense of why things are happening the way they are without judgment so that you can accept it. This does not excuse behavior and it does not condone it. So, I'll give you an example. A person is rude to you for seemingly no reason. You have the stressful thought, they shouldn't treat me like that. But you have no control over how the stranger treats you, and that results in stress. But instead, you start thinking, you're neutralizing that statement. Maybe this person had a really bad day today and they're unfairly It's wrong. They're unfairly taking it out on me. It makes sense that they would. How could they act any other way? It just makes sense. It's not okay. I won't sit around and tolerate this behavior, but I'm not surprised that they would act this way. Or this person who is rude to me is just a really rude person. They had a terrible childhood and they treat everybody like this. It's unacceptable and I choose not to be around them anymore, but I'm not surprised. It makes sense that they would act this way. So, what you're really doing here is choosing not to take it personally. And so there's a really great worksheet available online called Active Insight that helps you work through this. And so I want to go through this example so that this makes a little bit more sense because it's something that doesn't always make sense when we talk about it conceptually. So, as the first one here, write a concise, complete sentence describing something that you experience as stressful or challenging. It's helpful to use the words should or shouldn't. So let's use this example that they give. They should listen to me. How strongly do I believe this to be true? It's a 10. They should listen to me. How do I feel when I believe this? I feel hurt. I feel invisible. I feel angry. And so, how do I act when I feel this way? I withdraw. The so then write the negation of your statement from step 1. In most cases, you add in reality at the beginning, flip the main verb, and then add at this time or at that time at the end. So the negation of they should listen to me would be in reality, they should not listen to me at this time. So this is the hard part because it's hard to believe that statement. But in step 5, provide proof of what supports that negation. So whether you believe it or not, or whether you like it or not, what are some reasons that they should not listen to you at this time? For example, let's say it's a she that's not listening to me. She is arrogant, or she is uninterested in what I have to say, or she is my superior at work and does not value the opinions of lower positions. Or, for example, maybe it's on me. I am not explaining myself well. Or again, maybe she is busy. And so, how do I feel? I feel more understanding. I feel a little bit relieved. It's not on me. Or things are a little bit more clear. And so, the actions, what actions might come from this? You might ask them, how can I communicate this to you clearly? Or ask them if they're interested. Would you like to know more about X, Y, or Z? And so now I may feel that my original belief of they should listen to me is a 4. I don't believe in it quite as strongly. So, again, I'm not condoning the fact that she is arrogant or that she is not interested in what I have to say or that, I don't like the fact that she does not value the opinions of lower positions. But it makes sense why things are the way they are. So, what I've essentially done through this worksheet is I have neutralized the statement. It was a very emotionally charged statement saying they should listen to me. And now I've changed the wording, which removed the emotions I had attached to it. And now I feel different from thinking a different thought. So, do I still believe that they should listen to me? A little bit. It'd be nice if they did. And I still want them to just as much. I just as much still want them to. But considering all these other factors, it makes sense why they may not. And so, what I've effectively done is take this, what I can, into my own control to reduce my own stress. And so, a separate but very related concept to radical acceptance is mindful awareness. And this is useful because, in order to change our thoughts, which our thoughts lead to our feelings, in order to change our thoughts, we first have to be aware of what thought we are having. And if you haven't ever practiced mindfulness in any way, it can feel like there is no thought, it's just overwhelming emotions. And so, what mindful awareness is by definition, paying attention on purpose in the present moment non judgmentally. And it helps us to be aware of our thoughts and feelings. And so this is a really, really big topic. But if tackling the radical acceptance feels like, oh, I can never do that because I don't even know what I'm thinking in that moment, this is that piece that bridges that gap. So again, big topic, but here I've listed a resource where you can read on how to get started. Mindful awareness is not the same as meditation, although meditation is great, but practicing mindful awareness does not mean that you have to sit in silence in your house for an hour every day. It could be as simple as a 30-second check in the middle of a hectic day to notice your breathing and refocus. Or it could be as simple as you're driving in traffic, you feel frustration arise, and you stop for a second and think, what thought did I have that led to this feeling? And most likely, oh, I'm going to be late, or it shouldn't be like this. There shouldn't be traffic. And if you want to take this further with the mindful awareness, there is MBSR, which I just wanted to briefly mention here because it's such a wonderful resource. MBSR is mindfulness based stress reduction. It sounds a little out there, but it's actually very well documented for efficacy in research literature. It was originally designed for stress management, but now they use it for illnesses too, such as depression, anxiety, chronic pain, etc. It was developed by John Kabat-Zinn back in 1979. He wrote a book called Full Catastrophe Living, which I highly recommend. I actually read this book for an elective course that I took during my master's degree. And it talks about the research of mindfulness and MBSR, but it's also an interactive experience. It's really life changing. So you can join a group and do MBSR, or you can get somewhat of an experience from it from the book and self study. And so, beyond mindset shifts, I want to mention some practical ways to prevent that sympathetic state, that fight or flight. And so, I've got 8 of these here to mention to you as ways to just prevent getting into that stressful state. So, number one is eat enough food. Not a very common stress tip, but undernourishment or starvation is a source of stress. Number two is journaling. So, again, journaling is to improve awareness of your thoughts, just like the mindful awareness. Number three, getting adequate sleep. So, 7 to 9 hours is ideal. Sleep deprivation is very stressful to the body, and your mind does not function optimally if you do not have adequate sleep. Limiting caffeine. So, too much can be a stressor and it can put you on edge. A lot of people do feel more anxious when they drink more caffeine. And so that can lead us kind of predisposed to being stressed. Practicing time management skills. So, disorganization is a huge stressor. And even the busiest people, when they are more organized, they feel less stressed. So, especially in the context of a work environment, don't allow disorganization to be a huge stressor for you. If you don't know how to get organized, read books on it. Ask your peers, ask your coworkers, consult seminars. Like, find a way to get more organized. Find a way that works for you, because staying disorganized is going to be a huge cause of stress. This sounds simple, but making intentional time for things you enjoy. If you don't have enough enjoyment or fun in your life, that can leave you really susceptible to stress. Exercising regularly, again, this time as prevention. So, keeping a regular exercise routine will prevent you from falling into stress as often. And spending time connecting with people. Now, those are all prevention strategies. So once we are feeling stressed, and we know that that stress response has outlived its usefulness, we're now in fight or flight mode for no particular reason. We're experiencing chronic stress. We have to find a way to shift from that sympathetic state, that fight or flight, back to the parasympathetic state, that rest and digest, relax the alarm systems. And so I've got a couple here. So again, exercise. So it's not just useful as a preventative, but also in the moment to switch back to that parasympathetic rest and digest mode. Meditation and mindfulness. So bringing awareness to the present moment can pull us out of our stress response. And lastly, doing something fun. So we tend to see playtime as optional, and it's something we do if we have time, but it actually is very essential to making sure we have time to either relax or do something we enjoy, spend time with people we care about, that we like spending time with, to make sure that we are managing that stress response. Well, thank you guys for staying to the end. I know this was a lot of information in a short amount of time, but if these topics interested you today, I wanted to provide some resources for you to look into. So the first one here is The Body Keeps the Score, which is a really research heavy but wonderful book. And I did not touch today on the topic of trauma because it is such a large topic that I personally am not qualified to really give you a lot of information about. And so this book talks a lot about ACEs, which are adverse childhood experiences. Research shows that early childhood trauma has been proven to lead to more negative health outcomes later, and it also predisposes us to feel stress in a different way. So again, I didn't cover trauma today, but if you feel like this could be affecting you because you have childhood trauma or really any trauma, the Body Keeps the Score is a really wonderful resource about stress and trauma and the ACEs and hypervigilance. This middle book, it's two book covers, but it's actually one book. He originally released this book as The Myth of Stress, and then he quickly rebranded that into Breaking the Stress Cycle. It's a really wonderful book where I actually pulled a lot of these ideas from. The Active Insight was his that was borrowed for this presentation. Um, I pulled a lot of these ideas about how stress results from perception of triggers rather than the triggers themselves. So that is a really wonderful book if you liked that concept. And then lastly, Full Catastrophe Living is that book that I mentioned by John Kabat-Zinn about mindfulness and mindfulness-based stress reduction. It's a big book, but it is a really plentiful resource, so don't be overwhelmed by that. It's a great resource. I hope you enjoyed today's webinar on stress. I want to encourage you guys to reach out to me with any questions that you have, or if you want to just continue this discussion further. I hope you learned something today, and I hope you have a really great rest of your week. Take care.